Good morning. We're live right now at the Committee of the Revision of the Penal Code. I'm going to wait a few seconds before so everybody can log in from the public before we get started. So if you give us a few seconds and then we'll get going. Thank you. All right, good morning. It's good to see everybody on the PEM members. Happy holidays. And this is an exciting meeting for me because it is in some ways a culmination of a lot of work that we've been doing over the past year. We have an audience of, it looks like 50 plus folks who are members of the public, and we will have time for public comment at the end. So I'm going to get started. Good morning and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Committee on the Revision of the Penal Code, which is now in session. I am Mike Romano, Committee Chair. Thank you to everyone for joining us today under the circumstances. This is our 8th committee meeting of the year. I'm going to begin with a quick roll call of committee members in alphabetical order. Senator Burton, I believe he is unavailable. Judge Espinoza.
I'm present.
Assembly Member Kamlager-Dove.
Here.
Justice Moreno. That was a affirmative.
Yeah, I'm here.
Dean Richardson.
Here.
And Senator Skinner.
Here.
Thank you all. Today's meeting will be different from other committee meetings. From other committee meetings. There will be no witnesses for today's meeting, and we will instead spend most of our time considering 10 proposed revisions to the Penal Code and voting on which ones should be formal committee recommendations to the governor and legislature. But before we do that, we'll be hearing from Judge Thelton Henderson for some opening remarks, and if he's willing, I hope some Q&A. After that, we'll cover some brief administrative issues, and then we'll conclude with, and then we'll go into the committee recommendations, and we'll conclude with public comment, which we expect to begin around 1 p.m., depending on how much time we spend on the issues in between. We'll take a few breaks as usual, and a break for lunch if necessary. All right. With that said, Judge Henderson, your reputation precedes you, but we are truly honored and delightful to have you with us this morning. It's really impossible to introduce you with just a few words, so I'll say this. Truly, you are a living legend. Every Californian owes you a deep gratitude for your life of public service and the courageous actions you have taken throughout your career to make life better for some of the most disfavored people in our state. For the committee's purposes today, his most directly relevant experience is your time overseeing the long-running federal lawsuit about inadequate medical care and overcrowding in the California prison system. This experience has included serving on the 3-judge panel that ordered an unprecedented reduction in California's prison population due to violations of the United States Constitution. Judge Henderson has a truly unique view on many of the recurring problems that the committee has considered over the year, and we are extremely and eager to hear from him. And again, honored to have you. It's a pleasure to see you again. Judge Henderson, please take it away.
I will. Thank you very much for that kind and generous introduction. I'm honored to be meeting with you this morning, and I hope that my comments and observations will be helpful and maybe even interesting to you. I could talk about many things, police reform, but I'm going to talk about prisons today. The qualifications I bring with me consist primarily of presiding over 2 very large and important California prison cases. One, Madrid versus Gomez, which alleged a multitude of constitutional violations, including a pattern and practice of excessive force against the inmates and failure to maintain humane housing conditions at Pelican Bay State Prison. The other case was, as was just mentioned, Plata versus Brown, which involved the unutterably deplorable medical conditions in our state's then 33 prisons. In all, I've had about 22 years of having an uncomfortably close look at the dark underbelly of our prison system. The rationale given by the authorities for building Pelican Bay was that California's prison system throughout had become much too dangerous, laden with rival gangs out to establish dominance within the prisons, and filled with dangerous men who knew how to mix chemicals so as to turn something like a newspaper into a knife, a deadly weapon, and who acted as hitmen for their gangs. And it was thought that by isolating the most dangerous and disruptive of these prisoners, who were spread throughout the system, and putting them in one big supermax prison, it would cleanse the rest of the prisons, making them far more safe. I happened to be the chief judge of our court at the time, and I noticed that a lot of cases were being filed from this new prison up near the Oregon border. All of the complaints said essentially the same thing. Our treatment here is cruel and unusual. It violates the Eighth Amendment, and it is inhumane. And virtually all of these petitions were in pro per, handwritten on yellow legal pads. The cases were coming so fast and so plentiful that it was creating a huge administrative problem for our courts, because even a poorly written, poorly worded petition from an inmate is considered another case that has been filed and has to be assigned to a judge like any other lawsuit. So I decided to call the warden and ask if I could come up and talk to him. And to my surprise, he offered to come to our court and talk to us. I quickly assembled a court committee, and the 5 of us met with the warden in my chambers. And I'll never forget that morning. The warden was friendly, and he seemed anxious to share with us how very difficult it was to run a prison which consisted almost exclusively of the worst prisoners in what was the largest prison system in the country. And I might add, as an addendum, that our prison system at that time was so large that if you took California out of the United States and made it a separate country, we would have the 5th largest prison system in the world. And as he proceeded to tell us the measures that were being taken to control these animals, as he called them, that he had to manage, our mouths fell open. And I recall one of my colleagues leaning over and whispering to me, "My God, they can't do these things." As the warden described such things as putting inmates in totally solitary confinement in small cages, sometimes for weeks or even months, only getting out of their small isolated cells for a brief period to exercise, or putting prisoners in cages in their underwear and placing them outside in the cold air to teach them a lesson. In the Plata case, one of the first things I did was to appoint a team of medical experts to take a look at the medical system that was in place, a system that included 8 doctors who had lost their licenses to practice in our public hospitals, but were allowed to work at our prisons. The most startling thing in the experts' report was the finding that on average, a prisoner was dying every 6 days for want of adequate medical care. This finding has never been disputed by the state of California. After meeting with Governor Schwarzenegger and the top prison officials for literally months and seriously discussing every possible way to turn this situation around, it became obvious that nothing meaningful was going to happen. And so out of desperation, I took the unprecedented step of appointing a receiver to take over the medical portion of our prison system with authority to hire and fire doctors, to order the medicine, to make medical decisions, and generally run that part of the prison. And that receiver is still in place today, all of these years later, although beginning recently, I have to say that one by one, he has been turning individual prisons back over to the state as they achieve an agreement, as they achieve an agreed upon level of compliance. Now, I apologize for the fact that all of this is preliminary to my main message about our prison system, but I think it's necessary and helpful background for you. The law office that brought both of these cases was the prison law office, as we discussed earlier, directed by a fine lawyer by the name of Don Spector, whom some of you know. He's devoted his entire legal career to reforming our prison system. He has generously used some of the fees that he received from the state in the Plata litigation to take prison administrators and other officials from Colorado, from Pennsylvania, and Georgia to tour correctional facilities in European countries, primarily Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, to allow them to compare and contrast the prison conditions and practices and criminal justice philosophies in these countries with those that are here in the United States. By the end of the trips, the administrators and officials had come to a new understanding of the sharp differences between our respective penal institutions and criminal justice systems, and found themselves wondering why our criminal justice system and prisons were not more effective, less brutal, and operated with such little respect for human dignity, and placed such immense power and discretion in the hands of the mostly untrained and mostly unaccountable men and women who work as guards in our prisons. And it doesn't take very long to appreciate the huge gap between the conditions and philosophies in the European countries and those prevalent in the United States. What was most striking about the European facilities was their size, much, much smaller than the massive human warehouses that were employed in our country, and which, in my view, are simply too big to succeed. And also the sanitation, much, much cleaner than ours. And the number of mentally ill patients, very, very few, if any, in the European prisons. The cells, which were comfortable and non-punitive in nature. The work the prisoners do, which was meaningful and helped make them employable in civilian life. And again, not punitive in nature. And the pay for the work, which was substantial compared to ours. The overall atmosphere in the prison, which was calm, and the use of staff who are more like counselors than guards, and who have college degrees, and who are trained to get along with the inmates rather than try to turn them against each other. What is the reason for these massive differences? I think that Justice Anthony Kennedy best explained it in his majority opinion in the Plata case, when he wrote that, and I quote him, "As a consequence of their own actions, prisoners may be deprived of rights that are fundamental to their liberty. And yet, the law and the Constitution demand recognition of certain other rights. Prisoners retain the essence of human dignity inherent in all persons. A prison that deprives prisoners of basic sustenance, including adequate medical care, is incompatible with the concept of human dignity and has no place in civilized society." Now, again, I'm going to apologize to you for the preachiness of all of this and for the almost all-consuming passion that I've developed over these more than 20 years of seeing our prison system operate firsthand. We've seen that the Europeans treat their prisoners as one of their own, a fellow citizen who is erred, perhaps even seriously, but is expected to return to society and be a productive citizen, and who is expected to return to society and whose prisons are designed to achieve that end. On the other hand, I firmly believe that our system sees and treats our prisoners, a large majority of whom are not coincidentally people of color, as other, as outsiders, as outcasts who must be taken off the streets and put away for as long as the law will allow, and shift for themselves upon their release. The explanation for this difference can again be traced to the competing notions of human dignity. Justice Kennedy's opinion finds the essence of human dignity in the elements necessary to sustain life. The consequence of this formulation is that the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution demands only that prisons provide shelter, reasonable safety, food, clothing, and, since the Plata ruling, reasonable adequate medical care. Rehabilitation service, reentry programs, and meaningful activity are optional and too seldom employed in our system. When I was in law school, they taught me that the purpose of our justice system, our criminal justice system, was to punish, deter, and rehabilitate. Rehabilitation has almost completely disappeared in our system. And I've visited every single prison in this state, some a number of times. And the only rehabilitation efforts I've seen are volunteer efforts by people who come in and are allowed to come in and contribute some rehabilitation. Now, the European notion of human dignity is not nearly so limited. In the European countries that were visited, human dignity went beyond the bare essentials necessary to sustain life. Despite the commission of a serious criminal offense, and often a history of such conduct, the European prisoner's dignity is grounded in more than his being. It stems also from his place in the community. The fundamental philosophical difference is that in these European countries, prisons are truly a last resort, and that once incarcerated, prisoners do not lose their place in the community. Instead, and this is important, intermediate punishments are the norm, not maximum punishments. And imprisonment is seen as a transitional stage where the goal is not solely to punish, but to reintegrate the prisoner into society in a way which will benefit him and the community. The deprivation of liberty is the punishment. Prisons are not intended to be houses of pain and boredom, where they can easily learn to be better criminals once they get out. They are, or at least should be, designed to be as normal as possible so that the transition back to the community is as seamless as possible. Now, I fully realize that this is idealistic and aspirational to some degree, but I think that it points the way for you as a committee, at least to start this long journey to humanizing our system. I know that you've already discussed sentencing reform with Craig Haney, whom I greatly admire and also met back in my Stanford days when I taught a course there about treatment of criminals. But it bears repeating that prisons truly should be a last resort, not the first resort, and that reentry programs and diversion programs ought to play a much larger role than they now do. Two of the most satisfying experiences of my entire 37-year judicial career was serving as a judge on two state court diversion programs. One run by Judge Henry Ramsey in Alameda County, and one run by District Attorney Kamala Harris in San Francisco. They really work when you catch these fledgling criminals in time. And it should also be repeated that once incarcerated, the sentencing goal should be not to crush the spirit and show the inmate what's awaiting him should he dare do anything like that again, but rather that this is the beginning of a process that will, and as quickly as is practical, return him to society, better equipped than before to be a full and productive citizen. You're faced with a Herculean task, one which at bottom is structural and systemic. And we all know that changing the inhumanities I've been discussing will not come with a single stroke of this committee's pen. But this committee has the power to begin the humanizing process at the very earliest possible point in our prison system. And that is the moment when a defendant has been found guilty or has admitted his guilt and is now about to be sentenced. So we should end sentences that have already given up on a young kid who, by virtue of his circumstances, thought that selling marijuana offered him a better future than flipping burgers at McDonald's, as I've been told so many times in these diversion programs I've been involved in. No more sentences which assume that smoking or selling crack in the ghetto is 4 times as bad as sniffing or selling powder cocaine in the suburbs, as I was required to assume in federal court when I had to sentence. I think you have the picture. As I said, you're faced with a Herculean task. So was Thurgood Marshall when he set out to challenge the segregation laws in the South. By some measures, he started in 1947, and he ended with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, a 7-year process. Changing our sentencing laws is important. It's worth that effort if it takes that long. It's an important but not final step in reforming our often racist, our often sadistic, our often misguided criminal justice system. It'll take time, but now is the time to start the process. And I hope that your interaction with the Law Review Commission will assist them to recommend needed reforms in these areas that are beyond your purview. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for letting me speak, and I welcome any questions you may have in the time that we have left.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Henderson. I'm still processing what you're saying, and they're extraordinarily well taken by me, and I think I'm going to speak for other committee members. You did mention, I'm going to take the liberty of asking a question or two, or a first question, and I hope other members will, and let's keep this to maybe 10 or so minutes. But so you did mention a few specific proposals that you might suggest we look at, particularly drug reforms. If you were given, and I asked this to a lot of folks, if you were given a magic wand to change California's system and criminal laws, and it doesn't even need to be necessarily sentencing laws. Is there something in particular that sticks out to you as your top of your wish list, or is it the task so big that it's hard to even start?
Oh, there are a number of things, and I think that we have to fashion laws that allow the individual to be considered, that is at court. And I like to give an example, and I keep in mind, I come from the federal court and it's different, but I think the considerations are the same. When I was a new judge, this was typical of what judges could do. We had bank robberies, a lot of bank robberies back then. This was in the early 1980s. And each bank robbery would have a maximum of 10 years sentence. You'd have someone typically who was caught on the third bank robbery and was charged with 3 of them. And the argument before me, the prosecution, Judge, this man is dangerous. This is his 3rd bank robbery. The teller said he had his hand in his pocket as if he had a gun. He probably did. And the next bank robbery, he's going to kill somebody and it's going to be on you. He didn't use that phrase, but that's what he meant. And we're asking you to send him away for 30 years. Defense counsel, Judge, this is not about bank robberies. This is about drugs. He has a drug problem. He robs banks to get drugs. Put him in for long enough to cure his drug problem. These are signs here. Have a program. And if they don't have a program put him in an institute. And I regularly put people in Delancey Street, which you may have heard about, which has a wonderful program. And you'd give a short sentence and put them in Delancey Street, and they were okay. And many of them, I've been in touch with them over the years. They stay in touch because they're grateful, and they're fully participating citizens now. We don't have that kind of discretion anymore. And I think our sentencing law should give that discretion. Now, I know there's a tension between what a judge should do and what a prosecutor should do, but these 2 individuals have different goals. And I have friends who are prosecutors, but they will tell you in private that they're looking for their record depends if they're going to run on the percentage of prosecution. There's a different agenda. And you have to understand that as you formulate these laws and decide who can make these tough decisions with an underpinning. And that's why I talked about humane and returning to society. That should be the goal of these things, not maintaining records of prosecutions and all, but doing a whole picture for a complete individual with the idea of returning him back to society. That's still fairly general, but I think maybe that's the best answer I can give you.
Justice Moreno? You're on mute.
I think
I got it.
there you go, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Judge Henderson. It's great to see you again and to hear your really insightful talks. And I served on the state courts for 11 years, and Judge Espinosa for leaving longer than that, and we were exposed to some pretty heinous, and violent crimes, unlike in the federal system where I also served for 4 years. And I appreciate, the comparisons to the European models in terms of how they treat even its most serious incarcerated individuals. And it's something I think to be admired. But here's what I wonder about in the United States. Not only the difference in the demographics, which is one thing, but I don't think it's dispositive. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. And I think it's the element of retribution. You mentioned three, components or objectives of the criminal justice system, but didn't mention retribution. And I think that, with I think we're a different culture when it comes to victims' rights and their role in the criminal justice system, their outrage and so forth. And I wonder what can be done about that. And I think it's a fundamental difference between our criminal justice system and the other, you say, more enlightened criminal justice systems that may not place as much emphasis on that objective. So I wonder what we can do as a commission, what we can do in terms of revising the penal code to put the element of retribution in a more humane and civilized perspective. But I really have that concern, seeing the seriousness of the crimes that I've seen and tried in the Superior Court, and it's really a big consideration, I think, when you consider that in terms of reforming our justice system. So that's kind of my concern.
Let me, if I don't answer it, come back at me, Carlos. But your questions are mindful of a wonderful skit by Richard Pryor, who was talking about the same thing and being taken on a tour of a prison and going in saying, "Oh, you're too tough on the brothers," and going through the prison. And when he comes out, having seen some of the things you're talking about, saying, "Thank God for prisons."
Yeah.
No, there are, and I've had this experience.
Yeah.
There are some
bad dudes,
people in those prisons. And for those, you do. But I think it's part of the deterrence, punishment, and rehabilitation. That's part of the deterrence. The deterrence is if they're not ready, you don't let them back out on the street. I think that's the answer. I'm not sure about retribution. I don't, I'm not sure I would put that in the mix.
Yeah, it's disfavored for sure these days.
Yeah, it is. But you deter them. There are people that have mental problems and they're serial killers, and they will do it again. And we know that, and the experts will tell us that, and we don't let them back out. But far too many are not like that, and they're more akin to the young people, I say, that are getting in, and that's why diversion programs are so important. That was a wonderful experience for me, and I thought one of you might ask, I'm a federal judge, and I've only been a federal judge. How did I become a state court judge? And it was by special commission. Henry Ramsey got me sworn in temporarily as a state court judge to actually serve as a judge in Alameda County on this one diversion program where I'd go over to Oakland once a week. And and again, I'm in contact with those young people that were in that program. You catch them at the right time.
Yeah.
You're just getting started, and you look at them and you offer things that they don't have. If they haven't finished school, you insist that you finish school or get an ED. If they finish school but they don't have a job, we have the Salvation Army and other units for furnishing jobs for them to give them things they don't have. And it's worked very well. Now, you would have to tell me how much of your committee's power can incorporate those kinds of things into sentencing, but they really work. And I haven't answered your retribution question.
Yeah,
but I don't know if I can beyond that.
I think you answered it.
Okay.
Speaking of Alameda, Senator Skinner, I think you had a question, and then we'll go to Dean Richardson.
Thank you. And Judge Henderson, incredible to see you. Thank you for sharing with us. I have a couple of questions. First one I have for you is, what change, given your long involvement in California's prisons, what changed so far? Whether it's been a practice within the prison or some of the sentencing changes, just what, from your sense, what change have we made so far that you feel has made the biggest difference?
Well, let's see. Let's look at the Pelican Bay case. What's changed so far that I've seen is that the warden that came down to talk to us really came down to educate us that this is what we have to do with these worst of the worst. That's changed. I don't think they look at that anymore. And I ordered some changes and some training, and that kind of need that anything we do to these animals is okay has changed. That's not a part of Pelican Bay or any of the other prisons. I think we've changed our view on that. What has changed in the medical system and under the Plata case, one, as you know, we've reduced the prison population. It was just grievously overcrowded. It was so overcrowded that Justice Kennedy did an unprecedented thing in his opinion. He attached a photo that we had included in there of the gym at San Quentin, in which there were double bunked beds that were so close together. And this is where prisoners were living, so close together. And I went through that room that you had to walk sideways to get to your bed. And it was inhuman, and no one should live into those. That has changed. That the prison has been reduced. And I was told by Governor Schwarzenegger and the head of the CCRs, I always get those, California Department of CDCR, that, well, our job is to secure the prison. We're not doctors. We don't, our job isn't to deliver medicine. Well, that's changed. They know that their job is to take care of the prisoners medically and give them a decent medical thing. And I remember having a long conversation with Governor Brown about that when I went to visit him in Sacramento. As I was coming in, there were some homeless people across the street from the Capitol. And I said, see those people out there? As they sit there now, or they lie there now in the doorway, Governor, your state of California doesn't owe them a duty to give them medical care. If they get sick, it's largely their problem. But when you arrest them and you put them in jail and you deprive them of a chance to take care of themselves, then you do owe them. And the prisons now understand that. And that's been a big change, and they're getting adequate medical care. One of the things I can say now that I didn't dare say when I was still on the bench, I have never written, and a couple of scholars that have studied the case have noted that, but no one else has. I have never written in any opinion what the standard is for care in a prison as compared to the care we receive out here, because I didn't want it to go up and be changed or questioned by the Supreme Court. So it's just a general understanding that they're entitled to adequate medical care. And I've left it at that because they're getting it. But those are the two main things. We've also had some training by the prisoners for the guards, and that's changed their attitude to see their duty. But a lot of them ignore it, I know that, but many have done it. But those are the principal things, Senator, that I think I've seen over the years.
So 2 other questions, and I'll combine it. So you referenced the different role of prosecutors, and you referenced in that different role, of course, just the nature of being a prosecutor has a different role, but you referenced that they have to run on. And so I wondered if you had, it occurs to me, even that perhaps we should not have prosecutors be elected, that maybe just that fact of the election drives a certain tendency within a prosecutor. So that's one, whether you feel that that alone would be a sea change. And then the second part is you referenced the power of the prison guards, and also the, in effect, they're not required to even have degrees or certain training or such. What is your opinion on increasing the requirements of who of the position? In other words, who would be in those roles?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's take.
Let me interject before you answer here real quick.
Yeah.
Because Judge Henderson, you have a particular experience in the federal system where, of course, prosecutors are not elected. And I was wondering if you could reflect on whether or not that you feel significant differences between the cultures of those two different.
Yeah, there would be a difference. I was going to speak to the state where they are elected. And I think that would be a significant improvement if they weren't elected, or didn't, or somehow they didn't have to run and could not be attacked in an election on the percentage of prosecutions that they got. I think that would be a significant improvement. I don't know how that might be accomplished, but I think it would be a significant improvement and would do a job. We've been talking about humanizing our system. I think that would humanize the prosecutor's office if he could deal with a better sense of justice and outcome rather than prosecutorial success and convictions. It would humanize the system considerably.
And just to reiterate on that, so you truly feel that the U.S. attorneys that appeared before you had a different sense of compassion and understanding for the defense?
Slightly, but they didn't have to run. But I think that just the history of the office, I think they still took a personal pride in their record of convictions. So I think there wasn't a lot of difference. Now there's some that are different. There's one that I'm getting to the point where I'm fairly forgetful now, but a very fine friend was U.S. attorney. She lives in Berkeley, not far from my home, and I'm blocking on her name. You might remember her, Senator Skinner.
I do, and I'm blocking for the moment, but I'll remember in a moment.
You know who I mean. And she was different. She really was a humanist and really brought all the qualities, I think, that we're talking about here to the office. And maybe that just becomes a matter of who we appoint in the federal system to those positions.
And about the prison guards.
Oh, and the prison guards, yeah, the prison guards really could use, I think if we required some sort of program or certificate or educational level, it would improve the quality dramatically. And I wish that could be, if that's a part of your purview, to require that in prison guards. I think it would, it really makes a difference in those European countries as to what they bring to the job. Because the model that I've seen in our federal courts, they figure that the guards figure they're protecting themselves by turning the prisoners against each other, you know, divide and conquer kind of a thing. And it's no place to bring that to a prison, but to bring it, to bring an attitude that they can serve a role in rehabilitating, and that their job is not to just make sure these people don't escape, but to make sure that they improve during their time of incarceration and help prepare them to return to society as productive citizens. I think it would be a huge improvement. I had occasions, Pelican Bay was built up in up near the Oregon border, Crescent City, and I used to fly up there regularly to inspect the prison, and I would fly into town and stay in a motel, and the town was so run by the prison guards that, and I wanted to make a surprise visit and go because I wouldn't see what I wanted to see when they knew I was coming. But the whole town revolved around the prison, and by the time I got there, so I had to start flying into Eureka and renting a car and driving in. But I saw that this prison was built in Crescent City as a state decision that the lumber industry had diminished up there, and that this was a way to revitalize financial, and it did so. So the guards are sort of some of the big spenders in town, and they make a good salary. And I think it would be a good idea that they had more training than they have, that they would be better guards and understand their mission much better if they were trained, rather than that their job is to make sure these people don't escape from prison, which is about their only understanding of what their job is.
Thank you. And I think I remember her name, Melinda Haig.
Melinda Haig, exactly. Thank you. Yeah,
Well,
she's would be my model of a prosecutor.
Dean Richardson, I believe you had a question.
I did. Thank you so much, Judge Henderson, for your powerful remarks and for reminding us of how courageous you are and we must be if we really want to do the hard work of fixing our broken criminal justice system. And I was a former state and federal public defender, so I've seen it from that perspective. And so the question comes from that perspective, actually, because some of what you've talked about relate to discretion, right? So whether it's the discretion of the prosecutor elected or appointed, the discretion of the judges, or the limitations, especially in federal court, on your discretion. But when discretion is exercised, and this is the perennial problem of sentencing, right? First, we remove discretion because of all the problems of discretion, and then we see the problem with that, and so now we add more discretion, and then the same thing happens, right? It always seems that discretion, either too much or not enough, is a problem within our criminal justice system. And so I wonder then what to do when we are thinking about sentencing. And some of what we have been thinking about is removing prison as an option altogether in the code, right? Just removing it. And I'm wondering what you think about that. So if we just remove it as a possibility for nonviolent drug offenses, let's talk about that first, even though I think even with some violent crimes, we should be removing the retributive punishment instinct that I feel like we have in this country. But I'll set that one aside because I think that's more controversial. I'm just curious about your thoughts about that. If we were to just remove the discretion to send someone to prison for particular types of offenses, and do you think that would be something that would be useful, helpful, or harmful?
I think it would be helpful in some instances. Let me make sure I understand your question, because what I'm thinking of is that's precisely what diversion programs do. They remove, or they potentially remove prison.
Potentially is the part I'm talking about. Yeah. Let's remove the potential and say
exactly.
They must do it.
Remove prison, and you take someone who is just starting out in the drug trade. These are the programs I worked in. And you say, these people are not yet deeply involved in crime. And so we're going to put you in these two cases, in Kamala's program and Henry's program, 18-month program. And if you successfully complete it, you will not be prosecuted. So that removes the potential of prison right there. And the kids thrived on that. And as I said, you did a workup on them. Well, this kid didn't finish school and he's just starting out with drugs. Here's what we're going to do. He's going to have to go to school. He's going to have to succeed. He's going to have to do this. This one needs a job. And you put them through that program, and I would meet with them periodically, regularly, and make sure they did these things. And my court, when I was in San Francisco Superior Court was about a block and a half from my federal court down the street. And I would regularly invite them over to my court, sort of to see the majesty of the court and get around and have to go through that system. And I kept in close touch with them. And it worked. Most of those kids succeeded. And some of the most satisfying experiences of my life, one night I was visiting a friend in a poor part of San Francisco, and gonna take him out to dinner. And I honked the horn and was waiting. My car was across the sidewalk and somebody drove up, big hulking guy, and sort of banged on my window. And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I'm blocking the sidewalk. And he said, "Judge Henderson?" And I said, yeah. He said, "Wait a minute. Will you wait right there?" And I thought, what's going on here? And he ran back, and he came back with his parents.
I had shingles.
Turned out to be a kid that went through this diversion program and now had a job and was doing well. And there's so many of those kinds of cases. It's, as I said, that experience was as satisfying as my 37 years on the federal bench. And as they work, they really do work. And I think if it's within your purview to institute those kinds of programs as an alternative to prison, it would serve you well. And it would be a start. As I said, the humanity problem that we have in the European countries, we have systemic and structural hurdles in that, but this would be a strong step toward that. And I certainly urge it.
Thank you so much, Judge.
Thank you, Judge. Before we leave, Assemblymember Kamlager or Judge Espinoza, do you have any last questions?
Just want to
Assemblymember
thank
Kamlager.
I just want to thank Judge Henderson for being here and sharing the wisdom that he's gathered over many years of trying to reform the prison system. Amazing work. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Assemblymember Kamlager Dove.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. And that last story, I think, is probably why so many of us actually do the work that we're doing, because we're trying to get more of those stories. You know, I was compelled to think about your response to Justice Moreno's comment and question, and agree with you that there are bad people that do bad things, but there are also good people that make bad mistakes. And it seems like we've sort of created a system that's, you know, overly punitive and just increasingly hungry or just unsatiated by the numbers that we're seeing, which most would say are growing and far too big. So I was just wondering if you think, because I don't want to sort of ask a biased question, but do you think that prosecutorial power is growing or has grown and has become unchecked or not? And if you don't, it would be great if you could share some of the checks and balances that work. But if you do think that we have created a system with increasingly unchecked prosecutorial powers. Do you have any thoughts on ways to kind of create some new checks and balances for that?
Let me try to answer that. And here, understand that it's coming more from my federal judgeship position. Certainly, and we might want Justice Marino to chip in because he also was a federal judge. But I felt when we came in with the sentencing guidelines that what we had done was take judicial discretion, like the ones that I described when I would sentence someone to Delancey Street and really designed to try to rehabilitate them. That was taken away from me. And judges had virtually no discretion. And I would comment, and my colleagues would comment that, you know, we have no discretion, and they've given all the discretion that is here in the sentencing guidelines system to the prosecutors, because the prosecutors can shape the guidelines by what they charge. I'm not going to give them this charge. I'm going to charge here, and this is the way I'm going to set up this case, and this is the evidence I'm going to show. And they control the whole ball game. All we had was the guidelines. And early on, I actually, when I reached the age of 65, I kept judging after. I could have retired, but I loved the job. I practiced, I worked for free essentially for a number of 15 more years. But one of the things I was allowed to do when I got to be 65 was judges can't pick their cases. They're assigned randomly. But when you get 65 and go senior, you can pick the cases you don't want. I actually got out of the criminal category. I stopped taking criminal cases because it was breaking my heart. I had 2 young kids up in Eureka, where there's drug country, marijuana country, no record. They were getting ready to go to college, 2 friends, and they decided to grow some marijuana out in their parents' backyard, which was adjacent to some federal properties, federal forest property, and they got caught. And by the guidelines, simply because of the quantity of marijuana they were growing. You have no choice there. You have this much marijuana, the guidelines say this. I had to sentence them to a mandatory minimum sentence, which utterly destroyed their lives. They were good kids who got caught growing marijuana. No discretion. You can hold a hearing. I held a hearing, tried to look for some exit doors for them, sort of safe harbors that would avoid them, and I couldn't in good conscience do it. And had another case where I sentenced someone for driving a truck. He lived in a rough neighborhood, driving a truck full of drugs. He knew it was full of drugs, down to Fresno. And because of the amount of drugs, and he was on to make a couple of $100, I had to give him a mandatory, I had no choice on it. And this was the last criminal case I took that really did it for me. Less than a year later, they also arrested the head of that drug ring that was sending those drugs down there. They had built into the guidelines that cooperation was an important part of the sentencing. So the head of the drug, the guy that started all of this, cooperated, turned in everybody he could think of, and he ended up getting a lesser sentence than the guy that drove the truck. And I said, I cannot work within this system. And I didn't practice criminal law for about 6 years until the cases started giving judges more discretion, and I thought I would try it again. But I'm not fully answering your question, but judges need discretion. I think, you know, we're not all wise, but I think we bring some things in and an agenda that's designed to work with the individual much more than prosecutors. I'm repeating myself on that, but redirect me on your question because I've lost my way.
Well, it's so compelling. You need a podcast. But I just wanted to know where you think there's opportunities to insert more checks and balances so that the prosecutorial power that has increased over time can reset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And part of it is giving judges more discretion, but part of it's also possibly inserting judges more forcefully into the system so that you're not just seen as referees, beholden to one side more often than another. Or part of it could be figuring out ways to equal the playing field so that, you know, both sides are really walking into a space that is fair. But if one side is presumed to kind of be the one who's either shaping or has made or has a better interpreter of the playbook, then it's certainly not even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it isn't. You know, I think maybe this is an answer. I think that, again, going back to the prison law office, I very often encourage the attorneys because I'm a little hesitant to step too far into the case because judges, we know we can't be advocates for one side or the other, and we can't be seen as that. And so that's a problem. But I encourage the attorneys to think of ways and to bring them by way of a motion. And I did that a number of times. And Don Spector very often would bring up very creative things and file them as a motion, which then allowed me to deal with that motion and even hold evidentiary hearings and things that helped me. And I remember one of the things he did in the Mata case, which was pretty, was direct motion that led to the reduction of the prison system. It was a motion under the PLA that allowed us to have a hearing and decide that overcrowding was the principal cause of their inability. But I have the attorneys do that. I couldn't have done that. So again, I'm giving partial answers to you, and I wish I could do better.
I'll just buy a ticket to the next one.
Okay.
Well, Judge, I could spend all day talking to you, and we could really benefit from your advice. And as I've said to many of our other members, no good deed goes unpunished. So I hope that we can continue to rely on you in other ways and seek your counsel. So thank you so much for your time. As we go to the holiday season, of course, I'm just going to extend all of our good wishes and stay safe and healthy and as happy as you can. Thank you very much. I promise we'll be in touch and have a good afternoon. You're obviously welcome to stay, but
okay, no,
things to do too.
I will go and finish my breakfast now.
Okay, good.
I'm honored to have spoken to you, and please feel free if I can do anything formally or informally. I'm at your service.
The honor is ours. It's really a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. I'm
all right
now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great, terrific. All right, before we take our first break of the day, I'd like to go run through a couple of very quick administrative matters just to bring everybody up to speed. I have three of them. First, I want to give you a quick update on our year-long effort to collect data, which we think will be eventually the largest and best collection of criminal justice data anywhere. We are working very closely with the Department of Corrections to ensure all of their security concerns are met. And with the benefit of some of our philanthropic partners, we have finally received the bulk of the data from that we've requested from CDCR, and staff and others are working on cleaning that up and being able to present it in a way that will be usable to us on the committee and others, and being part of our report. This was a huge, heavy lift, and a big milestone was reached just last week when the spigot of information began flowing. So I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that. We're also anticipating another big a tranche of data from Los Angeles County, as the new DA, George Gascon, has offered and promised to share his data with us. Item 2, any questions? Moving on. Item 2, we need to meet in early to mid-January to approve the eventual report that will encapsulate the recommendations that we are voting on today. I propose that we meet January 13th at 9:30 a.m. Again, 9:30 till hopefully before 1 or 2. Can you please, unless you have immediate objections to that, can you please confirm with Brian as quickly as possible that date will work for you? Okay, Brian, do I have to say anything more about that?
No, that covers it.
Great. Finally, our third issue is to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which were distributed. And I move to move those minutes into the record. Do you have a question, Assembly Member? Second. Does anybody oppose moving the minutes into the record? Okay, those minutes are adopted. Those are the end of our administrative matters. I'd like to take a 15-minute break now before we get into the bulk of our meeting. So I'll take actually an 18-minute break until noon. Okay, you guys, I got you. I heard you loud and clear. So, I obviously want to balance that we don't sprint out the whole day, but I also want to give us all a chance to refresh. So please get your coffee, have a bite to eat. Those of you guys who are listening, and it looks like we have close to 80 people now who are in the public, which I really appreciate your participation. So we're going to adjourn now for until 12 noon. I'll see you all back in about
Mike, do you mean
Until 11 or 12?
Sorry, 11.
Okay.
17 minutes
I'm going to ask
starting.
that question. Just kidding.
He keeps talking. He's using up our minutes. I tell him I want my minute back.
See you at 11.